My name is Gilbert, and for 47 years my world was a symphony of machinery and a Bible of ink. I was a newspaper printer. I say that with a straight back and a chin held high, though I know to some it sounds like saying I was a blacksmith or a town crier. It's a dead trade, a relic. My son Leo certainly thinks so. To him, my life's work, the clattering presses, the smell of lead and pulp, the satisfying heft of a morning edition hot off the line, it's all a joke. A dusty, greasy, obsolete joke. He lives in a world I don't understand, a world of acronyms and algorithms, a place where fortunes are made and lost in the blink of an eye on something he calls DeFi. It sounds like a disease to me, and judging by the hole it blew in his life, I'm not far off. He came to me on a Tuesday, the day my late wife Martha and I used to go for our walk down to the river. The house was quiet, filled with that specific sun-drenched silence that old houses have in the afternoon. I was in my study, a small room off the living room that smells permanently of old paper and wood polish. It's where I keep my things, my books, my magnifying lamp, and the few curated pieces of my life that matter most. The door opened without a knock. That's Leo's way. The world is his. He just lets the rest of us live in it. He filled the doorway, smelling of expensive cologne and a low, simmering panic I've come to recognize over the years. He's handsome, my boy. I'll give him that. He has his mother's sharp cheekbones, but my worried brow. Lately, he wears that brow like a uniform. He didn't bother with pleasantries. He paced the small room, his $1,000 sneakers squeaking on the hardwood floors. Martha and I polished every autumn for 40 years. He ran a hand through his perfectly sculpted hair and said, "Dad, we need to talk. I've got a new venture. This one is it, the big one." I just looked at him over the top of my reading glasses. I was mending the spine of an old book. A simple, satisfying task. I didn't say anything. Silence is often my only defense against the storm of his enthusiasm. It's called the metaverse, Dad. It's like the next version of the internet. It's virtual real estate, digital worlds. People will live there, work there, shop there. It's the future. And I'm on the ground floor. My partner, Bryce, he's a genius. We have a company, a platform. All we need is seed funding. I set my book down. I knew what was coming. It's a speech I've heard in various forms for 2 decades. The dot-com boom, the app craze, the crypto gold rush. And now this, the metaverse. "Leo," I said, my voice raspy, "your last venture, the DeFi thing. You told me that was the future. I gave you $75,000 from my retirement account. You swore that was to stabilize things." He waved his hand, a gesture of supreme dismissal, as if I'd brought up a spilled glass of milk from his childhood. "That was a blip, Dad. A market correction. Everyone got hit. But you have to get back on the horse. This is different. This is tangible. Well, virtually tangible." He almost laughed at his own stupid joke. I stared at the photos on my desk. Me and Martha on our wedding day. Martha holding a baby Leo, her face radiant. The 2 of us on a cruise to Alaska. Our 40th anniversary, the last trip we ever took. This house, this quiet life, it's all I have left of her. It's paid for, every nail, every shingle, bought and paid for with a lifetime of ink-stained hands and early mornings. "What do you want, son?" I asked, though I already knew. He finally stopped pacing and looked at me, his eyes wide with the sincerity of a practiced con man. "The house, Dad. It's just sitting here. All this equity. It's dead money. We can take out a mortgage, 200,000, maybe 250. The bank will do it in a heartbeat. It's paid off. It's a guaranteed investment. We'll pay it back in a year. Double. It's nothing. A business transaction. A business transaction." The words landed like stones in the quiet room. He wasn't just asking for money. He was asking for this house, for Martha's garden, for the spot on the porch where we'd sit and watch the thunderstorms roll in, for the notch on the kitchen door frame, marking his height every year until he shot past me at 16. He was asking me to wager all of it, our entire shared history, on a digital fantasy. My throat felt tight. I shook my head. Slowly at first. No, Leo, I can't do that. This house, this is your mother's house. And then he did it. The thing that changed everything. He scoffed, a short, sharp, ugly sound of derision. Oh, come on, Dad. Don't be so sentimental. It's bricks and wood. It's an asset. You live in the past. You and your whole world. Ink and paper. Factories. It's dead. It's obsolete. Nobody cares about newspapers anymore. That world is gone. This is the new world. Try to keep up. Obsolete. The word hung in the air between us, acrid and sharp. He didn't just dismiss my caution. He dismissed my entire life. He dismissed the pride I felt in my work, the sweat and the craft of it. He dismissed me. In that moment, he wasn't my son. He was a stranger, a corporate raider, looking at a company to be stripped for parts, and I was the company. He didn't know. Of course, he couldn't possibly know. He saw my study as a dusty little room full of old man's junk. He'd never once, not in his entire 42 years, asked about what was in the climate-controlled cabinets in the basement. He'd never shown an ounce of interest in my obsolete hobby, my real life's work, the thing I poured my heart into when the presses finally stopped for good. He didn't know that my hobby was collecting rare historical newspapers, and he certainly didn't know that, just 1 week prior, I'd finally had the collection appraised. He had no idea that tucked away in a light-proof, acid-free archival box was a single, pristine, beautiful copy of the Pennsylvania Evening Post from July 6, 1776, the first newspaper printing of the Declaration of Independence, a single sheet of paper he would have used to wrap fish, a piece of paper the appraiser told me was worth enough to buy his entire metaverse company, with enough left over to buy the building it was probably housed in. He stood there, waiting for me to crumble, waiting for the old, soft-hearted Dad to give in like he always did. But something inside me had shifted. The soft earth of my grief and love for him had been struck by his words, and it had hardened into granite. I looked him right in the eye. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I just said, "I'll think about it, Leo. Let me think about it." He smiled, a tight, triumphant little smile. He thought he'd won. He clapped me on the shoulder. "That a boy, Dad. I knew you'd see it my way. Don't take too long. The future doesn't wait." He left, and the silence that rushed back into the room was different. It wasn't peaceful anymore. It was cold and sharp, obsolete. The word echoed and echoed. I looked at the picture of Martha, and for the first time I felt not just her absence but a cold, burning anger in its place. He mistook my love for weakness. He mistook my quiet life for an empty one. He was about to find out how wrong he was. I had a new venture of my own in mind, and I thought I'd use my obsolete old paper to fund it. Not his future. A future. One that would have made his mother proud. He'd called my world dead. He was about to learn that history has a way of rising from the grave. The front door clicked shut, and the sound seemed to sever a cord that had been tethering me to a version of my son that no longer existed. The air in the house felt thin, stripped of oxygen. I sank into my worn leather armchair, the one with the permanent imprint of my body, and the silence I usually found so comforting became a roaring vacuum. His words, obsolete, dead, sentimental, played on a loop in my head. It wasn't a negotiation. It was an eviction notice. He was evicting me from the modern world, from relevance, from his respect. My hands started to shake, a fine tremor that began in my fingertips and radiated up my arms. It was the rage of 1,000 small cuts finally coalescing into a single gaping wound. This wasn't just about the money or the house. It was about the casual cruelty of it, the way he looked at the life Martha and I had built, a life of simple, tangible things, a paid-off home, a garden she loved, a pension earned through decades of honest labor, and saw nothing but a pile of cash to be looted for his next digital mirage. I got up and walked through the house, my hand trailing along the floral wallpaper in the hallway. I could almost feel Martha's presence, her quiet disapproval of the ugly scene that had just transpired. She had always been the diplomat, the one who smoothed over Leo's rough edges, who translated his frantic ambition into something I could understand. "He has a fire in him, Gil," she would say, her hand on my arm. "We just need to make sure he doesn't burn the house down." Well, she was gone now, and he was standing there with a gas can and a book of matches, smiling and calling it progress. My mind drifted back, sifting through the years, looking for the moment the rot set in. I remembered him as a little boy, maybe 7 or 8. I'd taken him to the printing plant on a Saturday. The air was thick with the smell of ink and hot metal. The presses were silent, but I walked him along the massive machines, explaining how the plates were set, how the ink was rolled, how thousands of pages, each bearing the day's news, could be born in a matter of hours. He was bored. His eyes kept darting to the corner office, where one of the editors had a small television. He wanted to watch cartoons. He had no interest in the miracle of mass communication happening right in front of him. He just wanted the flickering screen. Then came the teenage years. The first time I had to bail him out. He'd borrowed my car and gotten into a fender bender. No license, of course. "It wasn't a big deal, Dad," he'd said, annoyed that I was more concerned with the law than the scratch on the bumper. "Martha paid for the damages out of our savings. He's a good boy. He just doesn't think," she'd insisted. But it was a big deal. It was the first brick in a long road of him not thinking, and us paying the price. College was a battle. He wanted to go to a private art school with a tuition that made my eyes water. His chosen major was something called Integrated Digital Futures. It sounded like nonsense to me, but Martha was adamant. "We have to give him the best, Gil. We have to give him the tools for his world, not ours." So we did. I took on extra shifts. We refinanced the house, the first time pulling out a modest sum to cover the costs. He graduated with a mountain of debt and a portfolio of what looked like screensavers. He never held a job in that field for more than 6 months. The pattern was set. There was the failed startup, a social media platform for dog owners that burned through $20,000 of our money before vanishing. Then the investment opportunity, with a friend in luxury car rentals that ended with the friend, and our $30,000 disappearing to Costa Rica. Each time he'd come to us, filled with shame and promises, and each time after my initial resistance, Martha would wear me down. "He's our son, Gil. It's what we do. We help." She couldn't bear to see him fail, to see him hurt. Her love was a vast, unconditional ocean, and he was a ship with a hole in its hull, and she just kept bailing. The last time after Martha was gone was the worst. The DeFi crash. I didn't even know what it was. He'd called me in a full-blown panic, crying. I hadn't heard him cry since he was 10 and fell out of the oak tree in the backyard. "Hey!" He said he was going to lose everything, that people were going to come after him. He swore on his mother's memory that if I could just help him this one last time, he was done. He'd get a real job, a steady job. He'd make me proud. Like a fool, I believed him. The grief was still raw, and the thought of him hurting, truly hurting, was more than I could bear. I felt like I was failing Martha by not protecting him. So I went to the bank and I pulled $75,000 from the retirement account I'd so carefully built over half a century, a third of my entire nest egg. I transferred it to him. He was effusively grateful for about a week. Then the calls became less frequent. And now, here he was. Not with a thank you, not with a repayment plan, but with a new, bigger demand and a sneer for the world that had provided the very money he'd just lost. I ended up in the basement, my workshop. It's not much, just a clean, dry space with my long work table, my bookbinding tools, and the tall, gray, archival quality filing cabinets that housed my collection. The air down here was different. It smelled of history, of rag paper and aged ink. It was my sanctuary. I ran my hand over the cool metal of the first cabinet. Leo was right about one thing. My world was gone. The clatter of the presses had been replaced by the silent scroll of a news feed. But was it obsolete? Was it worthless? His word echoed in my ears. Obsolete. It wasn't a calculated decision. It was a chemical reaction, a deep primal need to prove him wrong, not to him, to myself. I needed to know that the things I cherished, the things I had spent 30 years of my life and a considerable amount of my income carefully acquiring and preserving, had value beyond my own sentimentality. I went to my old roll-top desk in the corner and pulled out a worn business card. It had been sitting in a drawer for 5 years. Arthur Abernethy, antiquarian and ephemera specialist. I'd met him at a paper fair years ago. My friend and fellow retired printer Frank had introduced us. Frank was the only one who truly understood my collection. He didn't just see old paper. He saw the craft, the stories, the sheer survival of it all. "You've got a treasure down here, Gil," he'd always say. "Don't ever let anyone tell you different." My hand was steady now. The tremor was gone, replaced by a cold, quiet resolve. It wasn't about revenge. Not then. It was about validation. It was about holding up a shield against my son's casual disdain. I picked up the phone and dialed the number on the card. A quiet, reedy voice answered. "Abernethy, Mr. Abernethy," I said, my voice stronger than I expected. "My name is Gilbert Hayes. We met some years ago with Frank Petrie. I'm a collector of historical newspapers. I think it's time I had my collection appraised." There was a pause on the other end, and then a faint, intrigued hum. "Mr. Hayes, of course. I remember Frank speaking of your collection. He mentioned you had some rather special editions." I looked over at the cabinets, at a lifetime of silent history locked away. "Yes," I said, a strange sense of power beginning to bloom in my chest. "I believe I do." We set a time for him to come, the following Thursday. After I hung up, I stood in the quiet of my basement for a long time. The plan hadn't formed yet. Not the whole thing. But a door had opened. Leo wanted to use my past to fund his future. He had no idea that my past was about to become my future. A future he would have no part in. The foundation of his world was shifting sand. The foundation of mine, it was made of paper, but it was as solid as rock. Arthur Abernethy was not what I expected. I suppose I pictured a stuffy academic in a tweed jacket with leather elbow patches. The man who arrived at my door was small and bird-like, with a shock of white hair that seemed to defy gravity, and eyes that sparkled with a startling youthful intensity behind a pair of wire-rimmed spectacles. He carried a soft leather briefcase and wore simple cotton gloves, which he put on the moment he stepped into my basement. He moved with a quiet reverence, as if he were entering a tomb. My old friend Frank had come over to be there for the appraisal. He was a big man, a former press foreman with hands like shovels and a heart to match. He clapped Abernethy on the back, a gesture that made the smaller man wobble slightly. "Arthur, good to see you. Told you Gil had the good stuff." Abernethy simply nodded, his eyes already scanning the rows of gray cabinets. "Let's hope so, Frank. Let's hope so." For the next 3 hours I felt like a student being quizzed by a master. Abernethy worked with a focused, almost surgical precision. He'd have me pull a specific box, and he would carefully lift the contents, his gloved fingers barely seeming to touch the paper. He had a small digital microscope and a light sheet, and he'd examine the watermarks, the paper composition, the type impressions. He didn't say much, just made quiet notes in a small leather-bound book. Frank and I sat on a pair of stools, drinking coffee from a thermos, mostly silent. It was a fascinating process. Abernathy would hold up a newspaper from the Civil War, a copy of the New York Tribune, and say things like, "Remarkable, almost no foxing. You've controlled the humidity in here perfectly, Mr. Hayes." He'd comment on the quality of the rag paper in a colonial-era gazette, or the rarity of a headline about the California gold rush from a small defunct San Francisco paper. He was giving voice to the very things I cherished. He saw the craftsmanship, the history, the miracle of its survival. With every approving nod, with every scribbled note, I felt a lifetime of quiet passion being validated. Frank would catch my eye and give me a slow, satisfied wink. As the hours passed, Abernathy's quiet professionalism began to betray a flicker of genuine excitement. He had me open a box containing early 20th century paper. He carefully lifted out a copy of the Chicago Daily Tribune from 1948. The headline was infamous: "Dewey defeats Truman." Abernathy let out a low whistle, the holy grail for many political collectors. "The condition is superb." He jotted down a figure in his notebook that made my eyebrows shoot up. Frank grinned. But I knew what was at the bottom of the last cabinet, in the most secure climate-controlled box, the crown jewel. The piece I had spent a small fortune on 20 years ago at an estate auction, outbidding a man from a museum. "There's one more thing, Mr. Abernathy," I said, my voice a little tight. I led him to the final cabinet and unlocked it. I pulled out the archival box and placed it on the clean white surface of my work table. I lifted the lid. There, resting on a bed of acid-free tissue, was the single folded sheet. The Pennsylvania Evening Post, Philadelphia, Saturday, July 6, 1776. Abernathy stopped breathing. I'm not exaggerating. For a full 5 seconds he was completely still. He took off his spectacles, polished them with a cloth from his pocket, and put them back on, leaning closer. He didn't touch it. Not yet. "May I?" he whispered, his voice filled with awe. I nodded. He spent a full 10 minutes just examining it. He pointed out the type, a Castellan font. He noted the paper, made from linen rags, which is why it had survived so well. He gestured to the top of the front page. There it was, not in a screaming headline like we'd have today, but presented as an important piece of correspondence from the Continental Congress. The full text of the Declaration of Independence. This was the first, Abernathy murmured, almost to himself, the first newspaper printing. It came out on a Saturday evening. This is what people read in the streets of Philadelphia. This is how the news truly spread. He finally gently lifted it from the box. He turned it over, examining the back. He held his light sheet beneath it. His face was a mask of concentration. Frank had stood up and was peering over his shoulder, his big frame casting a shadow over the table. After what felt like an eternity, Abernathy laid it carefully back in its box. He took a deep breath, removed his gloves, and looked at me. His usual scholarly detachment was gone, replaced by a look of profound respect. "Mr. Hayes," he began, his voice steady but charged with emotion, "I have appraised collections for museums, for universities, for the estates of some of the wealthiest people in this country. I have seen rare and wonderful things. But this," he trailed off, shaking his head slightly, "a pristine, untrimmed copy of the July 6th Post. There are only a handful known to exist in this condition. Most are in institutional hands. To find one in a private collection, kept this perfectly, it's the discovery of a lifetime." My heart was hammering against my ribs. Frank put a heavy, comforting hand on my shoulder. "So what's the verdict, Arthur? What's the old piece of paper worth?" Abernathy opened his notebook. He looked at the figure he had written, then he looked at me. "Based on recent private sales and auction results for items of similar historical significance and rarity, my conservative appraisal for this single document would be $750,000. The number dropped into the silence of the basement and exploded. Frank let out a sound somewhere between a gasp and a laugh. "Good God, Gil. $750,000 for one piece of paper. A piece of paper my son would have called obsolete junk. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. My first immediate thought was a flash of pure vindictive fantasy. I imagined myself writing a check for the full amount, walking up to Leo and his partner Bryce, and flicking it at them. "Here's your seed money. Don't bother paying me back." Watching the shock and greed on their faces. But the image faded as quickly as it appeared. What would that accomplish? It would reward his greed. It would validate his belief that I was nothing more than a walking ATM. It would make me a player in his dirty, frantic game. It would be a victory, but a hollow one. And then another image bloomed in my mind, clear and bright. It was the face of a young, eager journalism student I'd met years ago when I'd given a guest lecture at the local university. The passion in her eyes, her love for the printed word, her worry about finding a job in a dying industry. She had reminded me of myself at that age. My life's work. The thing Leo had spat on. What if I could use its value not to destroy, but to build? What if I could use this relic of the past to forge a future for others who shared my passion? The idea settled over me, not with the heat of revenge, but with the warm, solid certainty of purpose. It was perfect. It was poetic. It wasn't about spiting Leo anymore. It was about honoring Martha. She was a teacher. She believed in education, in giving young people a chance. This would be a monument to my life, and to hers. "Frank," I said, turning to my old friend. My voice didn't waver. "I'm going to sell it." "And then you're going to take a long, long vacation," he boomed, grinning. "No," I said, looking at the Declaration of Independence, a document about creating something new and free from tyranny. "I'm going to endow a scholarship." Frank's smile faltered, replaced by a look of confusion. "A what?" "The Gilbert and Martha Hayes Scholarship for print journalism," I said, the words tasting right in my mouth. "At the university. For students who believe in the power of ink on paper. For the ones who want to tell the truth and know how to spell check it. My obsolete world is going to fund its own future." Frank stared at me for a long moment. Then his broad face broke into the widest, most genuine grin I had ever seen. He didn't say a word. He just pulled me into a bear hug that lifted me off the floor. When he set me down, his eyes were wet. "Martha would have loved that, Gil," he choked out. "She would have absolutely loved that. I knew she would have." In that moment, the plan was no longer a secret. It was a mission. Leo wanted to build a fake world in the metaverse. Fine, I was going to invest in the real one. It wasn't about revenge, but I had to admit, the thought of the look on my son's face when he found out was a significant bonus. The week that followed was a strange exercise in duality. On the one hand, I was moving with a newfound sense of purpose, a secret engine humming away inside me. On the other, I was fielding an escalating barrage of communications from Leo. His initial breezy confidence began to curdle into annoyance. The text started first. "Hey Dad, just checking in. Have you spoken to the mortgage broker I recommended? Dad, the clock is ticking on this. Bryce is getting antsy. Seriously, what is the holdup?" It's a simple phone call. I ignored them all. Each ping from my phone was a small, satisfying reminder of the control I now held. For years, his urgency had dictated my pace. His crises were my emergencies. His deadlines were my obligations. Now his panic was just noise, like static from a distant station. I was operating on my own schedule. My first call was to Dean Collier at the university's School of Journalism. I'd met her a few times over the years. She was a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her late 50s who ran a tight ship. I told her I had a philanthropic matter of some significance I wished to discuss. We arranged to meet in her office. I walked onto that campus feeling 10 feet tall. I wasn't a retired printer anymore. I was a benefactor. I was a man with a purpose. Dean Collier's office was lined with books and awards, but a framed front page of the New York Times from September 12, 2001, held the place of honor behind her desk. I knew I was in the right place. I didn't bring the newspaper itself, of course. Abernathy was already discreetly making inquiries with a trusted auction house, but I had brought the appraisal document and a high-resolution color photograph of the post. I laid them on her desk. She picked up the photograph first, her expression curious. Then her eyes found the date, July 6, 1776. She froze. She looked from the photo to the appraisal, her professional composure cracking just enough for me to see the shock beneath. "Mr. Hayes, is this real? As real as the desk you're sitting at, Dean," I said. "And I want to use it to create an endowment. In my late wife's name and mine. Specifically for students dedicated to the craft of print journalism." She stared at me, speechless for a moment. Then she leaned back in her chair, a slow, wondrous smile spreading across her face. "Gilbert," she said, dropping the formal title. "In all my years as dean, I've had alumni donate stock options, property, art. No one has ever offered to fund the future of journalism with its very foundation. This is poetic." We spent the next hour working out the broad strokes. The scholarship would be substantial, covering full tuition for 2 students each year. There would be a focus on investigative reporting and long-form narrative nonfiction, the kind of work that required patience and dedication, the very opposite of Leo's instant gratification world. We talked about creating a small, dedicated library for the students, the Hayes Collection, seated with some of my less valuable but still historically significant papers. The more we talked, the more real it became. It was no longer just an idea. It had structure, purpose, a life of its own. Meanwhile, the siege at home was escalating. After 3 days of ignored texts, Leo called. I let it go to voicemail. The message he left was dripping with entitled frustration. "Dad, for crying out loud, pick up the phone. I don't know what game you're playing, but it's not funny. I have partners. I have a reputation. You are making me look like an idiot. Call the bank. Today." The next day he showed up. It was a Saturday morning. I was in the kitchen, reading the local paper, the real physical paper, and enjoying a cup of coffee. He let himself in, his face a thundercloud. "What is your problem?" he snapped, foregoing any greeting. I slowly folded my newspaper and set it on the table. I took a deliberate sip of my coffee. I looked at him, my expression placid. "Good morning to you too, Leo." "Don't good morning me," he said, his voice rising. "I've been calling. I've been texting. You're ignoring me. What am I, a stranger?" Yes, I thought. That's exactly what you are. But I didn't say it. I had learned from Abernathy's careful examination of my collection. The most valuable things are handled with patience and precision. My revenge would be the same. A cold, carefully executed maneuver, not a hot-headed shouting match. "I told you I was thinking about it, Leo," I said calmly. "It's a big decision. Mortgaging your mother's house is not something I take lightly. It's not mortgaging, it's leveraging." He shot back, spitting the jargon at me. "It's what smart people do with assets. They don't let them rot." I decided to give him a little something, a bit of misdirection to keep him occupied. I sighed, putting on a show of weary deliberation. I've been on the phone with my financial advisor, trying to see what makes the most sense. Moving things around, liquidating certain assets. It's complicated at my age. Taxes, penalties. I let the words hang in the air. I had in fact been on the phone with my financial advisor. But we were discussing the tax implications of the endowment and setting up a trust. But I let Leo's own greedy imagination fill in the blanks. The word liquidating was the key. I saw the shift in his eyes. The anger subsided, replaced by a flicker of avaricious hope. He thought I was caving. He thought I was selling off stocks or bonds for him. "Okay," he said, his tone softening. "Okay, Dad, I get it. Just how long is that going to take? Bryce is holding his end of the financing. He's starting to think I can't deliver. These things take time, son. I said, picking up my coffee cup. Patience is a virtue. He huffed, but he was placated for the moment. He saw a path to his money, and that's all that mattered. He believed he was manipulating me, the sentimental old man, into doing his bidding. He had no idea that he was a pawn in a game he didn't even know he was playing. "Fine," he said, heading for the door. "But hurry it up, will you? The future is being built right now, and I've got a seat at the table. I just need you to pay for the ticket." He left, and I sat there in the quiet kitchen, the smell of his cologne lingering in the air. Pay for the ticket. The transactional nature of our relationship had never been so starkly defined. I was no longer a father. I was a wallet, a resource, an asset to be leveraged. He hadn't just dismissed my life's work. He'd dismissed my life's role. I picked up my newspaper again, the cheap modern newsprint feeling flimsy, compared to the sturdy rag paper in my basement. But it was the same principle. Words and ideas, given form. A story being told, and I was in the middle of writing a damn good one. My silent takeover was proceeding exactly as planned. His panic was the soundtrack to my quiet, methodical victory. The power shift didn't happen all at once. It was a slow, quiet erosion of Leo's world, orchestrated from my armchair, with a telephone and a placid expression. He was used to loud confrontations and emotional blackmail, tools he had honed over a lifetime of getting his way. My silence, my calm refusal to operate on his frantic timeline, was a weapon he didn't know how to fight. It was like watching a fly buzz angrily against a window pane, unable to comprehend the invisible barrier that separated it from what it wanted. His partner Bryce was the first to sense that the ground was unsteady. He called me one afternoon. His voice was smooth, polished, the kind of voice that sells ice to Eskimos and digital real estate to fools. "Mr. Hayes, Gilbert." "Hello, Bryce Calloway here. I'm Leo's partner. He speaks so highly of you." A lie right out of the gate. I settled back in my chair. "Is that so?" "Absolutely. He told me what a savvy, forward-thinking man you are," Bryce continued, laying it on thick. "Which is why I know you see the incredible opportunity we have with our platform, Elysian Fields. This is the ground floor, Gilbert. This is like buying land in Manhattan in the 1800s. I decided to play the part Leo had cast me in, the doddering, out-of-touch old man. "Elysian what?" "Son, I'm afraid you've got the wrong number. I'm retired. The only platform I know anything about is the loading platform down at the old printing plant." There was a tight, controlled pause on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the gears grinding in his head as he recalibrated his approach. "Ah, yes, a little humor. I like that. Look, Mr. Hayes, the bottom line is, Leo guaranteed us that his half of the seed funding was secured. Our venture capital guys are finalizing the next round, but it's contingent on this initial investment. Is there a problem we should be aware of?" The smooth voice was a little harder now. The velvet glove was slipping, revealing the iron fist of a man who doesn't like his time being wasted. "Problem? No, not at all," I said amiably. "I'm just a bit old-fashioned. I like to read the fine print. You know, ink on paper. It's hard to do that with all this meta-what's-it stuff." "Metaverse, Mr. Hayes," he said, his voice tight as a wire. "It's the metaverse, and it's going to be worth trillions. You're sitting on a golden ticket for your son. I hope you're not going to let a little sentimentality about a house get in the way of his future." There it was again. The same dismissive language. The same assumption that my life and my assets were nothing more than fuel for their ambitions. "Well, it was lovely talking to you, young man," I said, as if concluding a pleasant chat. "You have a nice day," and I hung up. The fallout was immediate. Less than 10 minutes later, my phone rang again. It was Leo. He didn't bother with a greeting. He was screaming. "What did you say to him? What in the hell did you say to Bryce? He thinks you're backing out. He thinks you're some kind of senile old fool who doesn't know what's going on." "I just told him I was old-fashioned," I said calmly, taking a strange satisfaction in his fury. It was like watching a storm from behind a thick pane of glass. "You embarrassed me," he yelled. "You made me look like a liar." I promised him the money was as good as in the bank. "My credibility is on the line, Dad. Do you understand that?" "I understand perfectly, Leo," I said. My voice was quiet, but it cut through his rage. "Your credibility is based on my money, and you've taken that for granted for the last time." There was a moment of stunned silence on his end. I had never spoken to him like that before. The accommodating, long-suffering father was gone. He was talking to someone else now. Someone he didn't know. His desperation took a new, uglier turn. "You can't do this to me," he said, his voice dropping to a low, threatening hiss. "You know that loan I took out for the car last year? The one you co-signed for? If I default on that, the bank comes for the house anyway. Your credit is tied to mine. You sink, I sink. We're in this together, Dad." It was a bluff, and a poorly researched one. I had co-signed a car loan for him years ago, one that had been paid off. He was counting on my age, on my supposed ignorance of my own finances. It was a pathetic, desperate Hail Mary, and it was the last straw. He wasn't just entitled anymore. He was cruel. "Is that a threat, Leo?" I asked, my voice dangerously soft. "It's a fact," he shot back. "You need me to succeed as much as I do." "I see," I said. "Well, thank you for clarifying your position. I have to go now. I have a meeting." I hung up before he could respond. My meeting was with a representative from the auction house. Mr. Abernethy had arranged everything. The sale was to be private, handled with the utmost discretion to maximize the value and avoid a media circus. They had a buyer, an anonymous collector from overseas, who was prepared to meet the appraisal value and then some. The final offer was for $810,000. The deal was done. The funds were being transferred to a new trust account my advisor had set up. The university, meanwhile, was moving ahead with plans for a small press event to announce the new scholarship. Dean Collier had called me, bubbling with excitement. "The campus paper wants to do a whole feature, Gilbert. The story is just too good. The old printer saving the future of print. Can we get a photo of you in your workshop?" "Absolutely," I said. "And Dean, I have one small request. I'd like to invite a special guest to the announcement ceremony. My son." There was a brief pause. "Of course," she said, her voice careful. "That would be lovely." She had no idea. But I did. The stage was being set. The lights were being hung. The final act of this long, painful play was about to begin. Leo thought we were in the same boat, sinking together. He was about to find out that I was standing on the shore holding a life raft, and it wasn't for him. The day of the vindication arrived, a crisp, bright autumn afternoon. The kind of day where the air feels clean and full of possibility. I had called Leo a few days prior, my voice carefully calibrated to sound conciliatory, even a little bit frail. "Leo," I'd said, "you were right. I've been sentimental. I've made some arrangements. I've liquidated some assets. I'd like to meet to discuss the final details of your investment." The relief in his voice was palpable. "Dad, that's great. I knew you'd come through. Where do you want to meet?" "The bank." "No," I said. "Let's do it somewhere a little nicer. A celebration. The faculty club at the university. Thursday at 3 o'clock. Bring your partner, Bryce, and bring your business plan. I want to see exactly what I'm investing in." It was the perfect bait. was wearing his best suit, looking uncomfortable but beaming with pride. We stood at the back of the modest reception room. There was a small podium with the university's logo, a banner that read "Securing the Future of Journalism," and about 30 chairs set up for faculty members, journalism students, and a few local reporters Dean Collier had invited. She greeted me with a warm hug. "Are you ready for this, Gilbert?" she asked, her eyes sparkling. "I've been ready for a long time," I replied. At precisely 3 o'clock, Leo and Bryce walked in. They were dressed in razor-sharp suits, smelling of money and ambition. Leo had a leather-bound portfolio under his arm, the business plan. He spotted me in the back of the room, and a wide, triumphant smirk spread across his face. He clearly thought this whole setup, the podium, the banner, was some kind of grand, eccentric gesture on my part, a theatrical way to hand over a big check. He strode towards me, Bryce trailing in his wake like a pilot fish. "Dad, this is a little much, don't you think?" he said, gesturing around the room with a chuckle. But he was pleased. He loved an audience. "Bryce, this is my father, Gilbert Hayes." Bryce extended a hand, his smile perfectly white and utterly insincere. "A pleasure, Mr. Hayes. Leo tells me you've decided to join us in building the future." "Something like that," I said, my voice neutral. I didn't shake his hand. Just then, Dean Collier stepped up to the podium and tapped the microphone. "If I could have everyone's attention, please. Welcome. We're here today to announce a truly transformative gift to the School of Journalism." Leo and Bryce exchanged a look of smug confusion. They took seats in the front row, Leo placing his portfolio expectantly on his lap. He thought this was the appetizer, a bit of university nonsense before the main course of his funding. Dean Collier began her speech. She spoke eloquently about the challenges facing modern journalism, the hollowing out of newsrooms, the struggle to fund the kind of deep, investigative work a democracy needs to survive. Leo was fidgeting, checking his watch. Bryce was scanning the room, probably assessing the networking potential. "In these challenging times," the dean continued, her voice rising with passion, "it's easy to believe that the old ways are obsolete, that the tangible world of ink and paper has been permanently replaced by the fleeting flicker." At the word obsolete, I saw Leo flinch, a tiny, almost imperceptible reaction. I kept my eyes locked on him. "But today," the dean said, her voice ringing with triumph, "we are here to celebrate a benefactor who believes, as I do, that the most foundational values are timeless, a man whose life's work was in the very industry we seek to preserve." Leo was frowning now, a sliver of doubt piercing his smug armor. He was looking from the dean to me, the gears visibly turning, but not yet connecting. "It is my profound honor," Dean Collier declared, "to announce the creation of the Gilbert and Martha Hayes Scholarship for Print Journalism, a permanent endowment that will fund the tuition of 2 promising students in perpetuity." A wave of applause filled the room. Leo sat frozen, his smile gone, his face a mask of utter disbelief. Bryce was staring at him, his mouth slightly agape. But the dean wasn't finished. She gestured to an easel that was covered with a velvet cloth. "And this historic endowment has been made possible by a historic gift, the sale of a single piece of American history, carefully preserved for decades by our benefactor." An assistant dramatically pulled the cloth away. On the easel was a magnificent, oversized, framed replica of the front page of the Pennsylvania Evening Post from July 6, 1776. "Funded," the dean announced, her voice booming in the suddenly silent room, "by the sale of a single supposedly obsolete piece of paper, a document that proves that the printed word is not just history, it is a legacy with enduring value." The room erupted in another, louder round of applause, and I just watched Leo. The color drained from his face. The sequence of emotions was stark, playing out in high-definition confusion to dawning comprehension to pure, unadulterated rage. He understood. The money I had liquidated, the reason for this meeting, the entire grand gesture, it was all real, but none of it was for him. He shot to his feet. The portfolio slid from his lap and slapped onto the floor. "You!" he snarled, pointing a shaking finger at me. His voice was a raw, ugly tear in the fabric of the pleasant afternoon. "You did this to spite me. That was my money. That was my inheritance." The room fell into a shocked, uncomfortable silence. All eyes were on us. Dean Collier looked mortified. Frank took a protective step towards me, but I held up a hand. This was my moment. I walked slowly towards my son until I was standing just a few feet away. I didn't shout. I didn't have to. My voice was calm and clear and carried the weight of 40 years of disappointment. "Your inheritance, Leo," I said, my voice quiet but cutting. "My inheritance is my legacy, not my bank account. You looked at my life, at the work that put food on your table and paid for your expensive education, and you called it worthless. You looked at your mother's house and saw nothing but an asset to be stripped." I gestured to the replica of the newspaper. "That piece of paper, that obsolete relic, it turns out it was worth more than your entire digital fantasy. My life's work just funded the future for dozens of young people who actually have a passion, not just an angle. That is my legacy. Something real, something that will last." Bryce, the savvy partner, saw that the game was over. He wasn't a fighter. He was a salesman, and the deal was dead. He quietly picked up his briefcase, gave Leo a look of pure disgust, and walked out of the room without a backward glance. He was cutting his losses. Leo was left standing there, alone, his face contorted in a mask of fury and humiliation. He looked from me to the smiling faces of the students in the room, to the reporters who were now scribbling furiously in their notebooks. He was exposed, his entitlement laid bare for the world to see. He opened his mouth, then closed it. There was nothing left to say. The power had shifted, completely and irrevocably. He had built his world on the assumption of my weakness, and he had just watched it all get demolished by a quiet old man and a piece of paper. He turned and fled the room. The sound of his footsteps echoing in the hall was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. Life is quiet now. It's the same quiet as before, but it's a different vintage. It's not the quiet of loneliness or resignation. It's the quiet of peace. The house doesn't feel empty. It feels full. Full of my own choices, my own future. Leo hasn't called. I don't expect he will. Some bridges once burned are just gone. I'd like to think that one day he'll understand, that he'll grow up, but I'm not holding my breath. My responsibility to him, the one Martha and I shouldered for so long, ended in that room at the university. Last week I received a package in the mail. It was a stack of letters. They were from the first pool of applicants for the Gilbert and Martha Hayes Scholarship. Young men and women from all over the country, writing with such passion about their dreams of becoming journalists, of telling stories that matter. One young woman from a small town in Ohio wrote that she wanted to be an investigative reporter to hold powerful people accountable in her community, just like the muckrakers of old. A young man from Chicago wrote about his love for the design and feel of a well-printed page. I sat in my study, the room Leo had called a dusty tomb, and I read every single one. My hands didn't shake. A few tears fell onto the pages, but they weren't tears of anger or sadness. They were tears of a deep, profound satisfaction. This was my legacy, not a number in a bank account for a spoiled child, but a living, breathing thing, a garden of new talent, planted with the seeds of the past. Frank comes over for coffee every Tuesday now, the day Martha and I used to take our walks. We sit on the porch, and he helps me go through some of my less valuable newspapers, helping me catalog them for the university's new collection. He calls me the patron saint of pulp. It makes me laugh. It really wasn't about revenge, not at its core. It was about respect. My son saw my life's work as a joke, a relic to be cleared away to make room for his shiny, hollow future. He tried to sell my past to fund his, and in the end my past proved to be infinitely more valuable. He called my world obsolete. But what's truly obsolete? A piece of paper that held the founding words of a nation and accrued value for over 200 years, or a digital asset that can be wiped out by a forgotten password or a market crash in a single afternoon. He mistook my years of love for weakness. He mistook my quiet nature for a lack of resolve. That's the mistake so many people like him make. They can't comprehend a strength that doesn't shout, a power that doesn't posture. They see a quiet man, an old man, and they see an easy mark. They don't see the deep bedrock foundation of a life lived with principle. They don't see the history. But history has a long memory, and sometimes it has a hell of a kick. I am Gilbert Hayes. I'm 74 years old. I'm a retired newspaper printer, and my world is anything but obsolete. So let me ask you, what would you have done in my shoes? Was I too harsh? Or was it the only language he would have understood? I'd be interested to read your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, I'd appreciate it if you liked the video and subscribed to see more stories like it. Thank you for listening.